Good evening. How are you? We're doing a sit and talk in part because it just rained a lot, and we spent the time outside in what was something like a light Irish rain, taking care of our animals and feeding them. The overarching thought that I think combines an understanding of the chaos that's being created intentionally by felon Trump and his corrupt minions is something like what John Dean said to Richard Nixon when John Dean was special counsel to the president, and he made a remark that, Mr. President, there's a cancer growing on the nation, growing on the White House. And I think that's what we have here. The replication of the metaphor for the DNA are the acts of Trump that go down step by step in an identifiable pattern of discrimination and choosing scapegoats and giving explanations, the purpose of which is to divide us. The purpose of which is to cause our heads to explode with the pain of anti-democratic seizures of our government in defiance of our Constitution, our laws, and our tradition. At the most basic, what we have is that the creatures of government created by Hamilton and Adams and those people, in contradiction of the approach by Jefferson and his allies, was a division between wealth among the Federalists, now Republicans, and increasing representation by the people and democracy by the Jeffersonians. This has been the division and the biggest fight, I think, in a way, for how our government would work from the beginning. And let's take a couple of incidents today. We had prosecutors who investigated Trump's efforts to overthrow the government and efforts to get rioters, insurrectionists, to help him do this. And there was prosecution of those rioters and, belatedly, an investigation of Trump's efforts to overthrow the government. And now, today, the Trump-picked acting Attorney General, Emile Beauvais, fired the prosecutors and is demanding the names of the FBI agents who worked on the various cases because they intend to fire them too. Can you imagine it? When Nixon fired people, they called it the Saturday Night Massacre, and there was hell to pay for it, and the prosecutions continue. How do we lose our soul between that set of events and how the nation and Republicans and Democrats recoiled from the corruption of Nixon to our present state of affairs, in which Trump does what he does pretty much without somebody stepping on his toes, putting a hand to his chest and stopping him from doing what he's doing. When Trump fires these prosecutors, what is our answer? To walk off meekly, to take whatever severance we get, or to sue the bastard? Sue. Fight. If you don't fight, you just feed the beast. We had a terrible event the other day. We had this plane crash. Some suspect, it may be true or not, that the helicopter actually confused one plane with another, and the result was devastation and death. Instead of Trump embracing a nation at sorrow for people that they don't know, but appreciative of the fact that there were some gifted people on this flight who could sail across ice in the most amazing ways and compete. Is that frivolous? Is that art? Is a nation supposed to take care of people like that? The plane that was carrying them was within moments of landing safely at an airport. It seems, according to some of the early returns, that the plane was at right angles to a helicopter that was traveling at such speed and direction that perhaps nothing could be done. We leave that for another day. But the one thing that I don't think can be said, having some familiarity with people who fly these amazing instruments. When I was a kid, I wanted to learn everything I could about Sikorsky because I was impressed by helicopters. It was a Sikorsky copter that was involved in this collision. So what does the president do instead of reaching out to the people and saying, I feel the pain you feel. This never should have happened. We'll do everything we can to help you. We'll get to the bottom of this. And if there's fault in any way, we'll deal with that. But right now, we want to help take care of you. There are issues. We'll consider the issues. Who was fired, what people were on duty that night, and so forth. But what do we have instead? We have a false story that a transgender military pilot was responsible and in that plane for that collision. Now, let's examine that. The fact that somebody was transgender doesn't change anything about the performance of the person flying. It doesn't show any defect of character. It doesn't show any lack of competence. But here's the other thing. The transgender pilot, Joe Ellis, who was identified, she was not in that copter. Nobody from the National Guard was in that copter, and she's with the National Guard. And in order to rebut the false rumors that she was flying the helicopter, she put on a proof of life to rebut this lie about her as a transgender being responsible for this crash. So that's what we try to do in the Trump administration. In the cancerous replication of one false, misleading, erroneous, misguided, hateful instance followed by another and another and another. And they ask the question also as well, the people out there, transgender, and was the crash intentional? So you want to believe that of the 3 Americans who were in that helicopter, that they intended to crash into a plane, that they had just said on the radio they believed they were not near, mistaken apparently one plane that was leaving for the plane that was arriving. Anyhow, that will all be studied. But the person that was identified as flying the helicopter was not flying it. In 1984, one of the theories of the dystopian society that comes with Big Brother in that famous classic is, how do we isolate discussions? Well, for one thing, I believe it was an hour, if I remember my reading. Every day for an hour, they go into a room and they shout. Can you imagine the repression that they have in a government like that? Just naturally, genetically, you would think, to initially resist this dystopian thing. And some have the faintest sense of reading books that are now outlawed. And what if you try to isolate members of our society by saying that they must remove pronouns from their emails and they have to do it by Friday? What is that about? What is that about? There have been other nations that, one in particular, that objected to Jews, and they did things to isolate and insulate them. So you get the feeling of this. This is, now, I thought it might take a while for this turn to the press, but there's a full court press in the sense that Trump wants to emulate, if you will, the Ministry of Truth, which is also in 1984. And it sends out meanings and words and so forth. And if they can take words from the public debate, then they think maybe you can't think about those things because you don't have the word that goes with it. And that happens now. You or I may find something that we can talk about, and somebody else hears you say it, and they say, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I didn't know how to say it, and vice versa. And that is how we learn. Teaching is like that. Reading will do that. Reading feeds your ability to write. If I reduce your reading, then I reduce your writing, or the quality of it, the definition of it, the clarity of it. So Chuck Todd is leaving NBC News, and he circulated a memo saying that. Now we had Acosta at CNN, right? This is a problem. Corporate is being crunched. Things are happening to them. The FCC chief appointed by Trump is ordering an investigation of NPR and PBS, and he says that could involve taking NPR and PBS off the air. They could lose their license to broadcast. So, what is the dividing line here? Unfortunately, some people are not getting it. Robin Williams, when he did an act, he would go along, and we all are familiar with his cadence. He was very fast, he was very smart, he improvised, and so it had a freshness to it, and it was as surprising to him sometimes as to us what he was going to say. Very entertaining. But not everybody got it. And sometimes when he was telling a series of jokes, and he didn't hear the laughter, and maybe he had applause that they were applauding for his effort rather than understanding what he was laughing at. So he says, he tells a joke, he tells another, and he says, and for some of you out there, catch up. That's the problem in America. We have too many hosts across the country that either haven't read enough or don't dare talk about what's really going on here. And what's really going on is an effort to overrun our democracy and to diminish people and to scapegoat them and to perhaps put them in Cuba and put them in this terrible den that we thought we had closed off. And the demarcation, I've always thought, between these far rightists, monarchists, for example, they take things literally. They believe things that aren't true. I think that better thinking people understand metaphors, and that a metaphor or a symbol can be transparent to transcendence. And then we also have this other clash. Over here, we have these people, and it's the wealthy. The government is for the wealthy. And there are, in fact, early writings in this nation going back to Hamilton and so forth, in which they're saying, why does a person who has a job thinks that they could be equal to me? Because that is our government. And it's amazing that we could even be having that debate, but we're handling this different than we handled Nixon. We're handling this in like a too generous way. And what could we do? Well, when somebody circulates a story, a false story about a person being transgender and piloting a plane she wasn't, that's libel. That's slander. That is actionable, and it should be acted upon. It's just absolutely wrong, but our government never helps, never may be strong. But I'll tell you, in recent days, they do not help the people who help us. All of those people who suffered when Trump tried to take over our government and then used that as an issue for 4 years to take over our government. What do we do for those people who were hurt? Did we Do we vote bills to make them better? Do we make grants of funds? Do we do anything for these people who are defending the Congress people, both the House and the Senate and their staffs and so forth? That's a terrible place to be trapped on the Hill, and many were, but they couldn't find them. And that may have been the difference between life and death for the members of Congress on the House and the Senate, but not for the guards, the officers, the security officers, those people, nothing for them. So we have to double down on fighting back and resisting. A second judge, for example, has said the freeze on the trillions of dollars that Trump did isn't lawful again. Why isn't it lawful? It's not lawful because Congress passed the law, and it can't be just changed on the say-so of anybody, Trump included. And that's what went on. There's a separation of the departments between the congressional, which passes the law, and the executive, which is supposed to enforce it. That's part of our problem. So we have people who don't believe in equality or equal justice before the law. They seem to believe that discrimination is an acceptable way to go. They don't believe in the truth, particularly if it gets in the way of the story they want to tell, like the transgender story. They are lying to America to let us believe that they're here to help us, and they're not at all. It's ironic that Reagan, who is part of this, he believed all of these things. He just made a better public presentation. I don't know if you remember Jim Garner, but he was asked about Ronald Reagan, and they had both been active in the SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, and he was asked what he thought of Reagan, and he said he was stupid. He had to be told what to say. So he just trotted him out, he let him say things, and he was propped up. Trump is propped up. Maybe not as much, but he's propped up. How do you have a man who doesn't read, who wants picture books for the most complicated things that are happening in America? But it's simple. They tell him what to do, he does it. You saw the signings. He's handed these executive orders. Did he put a pen to pencil? Did he hit a keyboard that made those words possible? No. All of it was done for him. He is just a part of this. Hurt his ego to do that, but think about it. On a building, there are a lot of buildings that have his name on it. He didn't build the building. Our government, he's not building our government. He's tearing it down to replace it with this dictatorship that Bannon and others have been after since 2015 at least. So what I'm saying is that do not allow anybody to suggest that you can blunt the issue, the alarm that should be echoing across the streets and valleys and plains of this nation, because that's what we're exposed to suffer. And we have to fight back, as attorney generals have, and get rulings as a judge has, and use the procedures in the law to challenge these things when somebody gets fired. And somebody's saying, well, it's just 30 days. What is that? Well, it's also, there has to be cause, and the Congress has to think about it. Why do we have these procedures if they don't mean something? The procedures are to cure the absence of due process. And what is due process? You may hear the word. It's fundamental fairness. So America's equality, its notion of fundamental fairness, its notion of justice for all, its notion of how we move forward, and do we not care for the Commonwealth of America? That is, to promote the general welfare written in our Constitution in the first paragraph. We, the people, are entitled to the government that is our contract with each other and with America. And this bastard in the White House is breaching it, and we have to put an end to that. So that's what I have to say. I don't know if there's rain tomorrow or not, but I'll be with you one way or the other. So thanks for listening. I hope you found it interesting. Bye-bye.